Get out of my house, I dare you! My wealthy daughter-in-law taunted me, saying I wouldn't survive a week without them. I packed my things and left a note on the table. The next day, her father and my son were panicking, calling non-stop. "What did you do?" "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I never thought my own son would stand there and watch his wife throw me out like garbage. But that Thursday morning in November, as I gripped my coffee mug with shaking hands, Wesley did exactly that. "Get out of my house, I dare you!" Zariah's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. Her perfectly manicured finger pointed toward the front door, her face twisted with a cruelty I'd grown to know too well over the past 3 years. I set my mug down slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. At 63, I thought I'd seen the worst of what family could do to each other. I was wrong. "Zariah, please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I was just trying to help with breakfast. She let out a sharp laugh that made my skin crawl. "Help? You call burning toast and leaving eggshells in the pan helping?" Her eyes narrowed as she stepped closer. "You're nothing but a burden, Thelma. A useless old woman who can't even boil water without making a mess." The words hit me like physical blows. I glanced toward Wesley, hoping to see some flicker of defense, some sign that he remembered I was his mother. Instead, he stood by the kitchen island, scrolling through his phone as if this conversation wasn't happening. "Wesley?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "Say something." He looked up for barely a second, then back at his phone. "Mom, you know how Zariah gets in the mornings. Maybe it's better if you just give her some space." Give her space. In the house I'd helped them buy with my life savings 2 years ago. Zariah's smile turned predatory. "You heard him. This is my house, and I want you gone." She crossed her arms, her diamond wedding ring catching the morning light. "In fact, let's make this interesting. I bet you wouldn't last a week without us. You can't even remember to take your medications without me reminding you." The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. She was right about one thing. I had been forgetting things lately. Small things. Where I put my keys. Whether I'd already had my morning pills. But the way she said it, like I was some helpless child, made me want to disappear into the floor. "I raised 4 children on my own after their father died," I said quietly, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "I think I can manage." Zariah's laugh was ice cold. "That was 40 years ago, Thelma. You're not the same woman. Face it, you need us more than we need you." Wesley finally looked up from his phone, but not to defend me. "Mom, maybe Zariah's right. You have been having trouble lately. Remember last week when you forgot about dinner in the oven?" My hands trembled as I reached for my purse hanging on the back of the chair. That dinner. I'd been trying to surprise them with pot roast, something Wesley loved as a child. But I'd gotten distracted helping a neighbor whose cat had gone missing, and by the time I got home, the smoke alarm was screaming. Zariah had made me clean the burnt pan while she ordered takeout, lecturing me about being a fire hazard to the whole neighborhood. "I'll pack my things," I said, my voice barely audible. "Good," Zariah snapped. "And don't expect to come crawling back when you realize you can't survive on your own. Some people need to learn the hard way that they're not as independent as they think." I walked toward the stairs, each step feeling like I was climbing toward my execution. Behind me, I heard Zariah's voice, softer now, talking to Wesley about their weekend plans as if I'd already ceased to exist. My bedroom, the guest room I'd been relegated to 6 months ago when Zariah decided they needed my old room for her yoga space, felt smaller than ever. I pulled my ancient suitcase from under the bed and began folding my clothes with mechanical precision. Each piece felt like evidence of a life that had somehow shrunk to almost nothing. The photo on my nightstand caught my eye. Wesley at 10 years old, grinning gap-toothed after losing his first tooth. I'd given him a $5 bill under his pillow, money I couldn't really afford as a single mother working 2 jobs. But seeing his joy had made the sacrifice worthwhile. That little boy was gone. The man downstairs bearing his name was a stranger. I tucked the photo into my purse and continued packing. Zariah's voice drifted up the stairs, already making plans for converting the spare room into something useful. I wasn't even gone yet, and I was already being erased. 20 minutes later, I stood in the foyer with my suitcase and a small box of personal items. Wesley was nowhere to be seen. Zariah sat at the kitchen counter, painting her nails a color that reminded me of fresh blood. "Leaving so soon?" she asked without looking up. "I thought you'd at least try to guilt trip us into letting you stay." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small piece of paper. My hands were steady now, calmer than they'd been in months. I placed the note on the hall table where Wesley kept his keys. "What's that?" Zariah's voice had lost some of its confidence. "Just a note," I said simply. She stood up, her wet nails forgotten. "What kind of note?" I picked up my suitcase and opened the front door. The November air bit at my face, but it felt cleaner than the air inside this house. "Goodbye, Zariah." "Thelma." Her voice was sharp now, urgent. "What did you write?" But I was already walking down the driveway, my suitcase wheels clicking against the concrete. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the front door slam. I climbed into my old Honda and sat for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. Then I reached for my phone and scrolled to a number I hadn't called in months. "Margaret, it's Thelma. I need that favor we talked about." My sister's voice was warm, concerned. "Of course, honey. What's wrong?" "I'll explain when I get there. But Margaret?" I paused, watching Zariah's silhouette in the kitchen window. "Don't tell anyone where I am. Not yet." As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. Zariah was standing at the window now, holding my note, her face pale even from this distance. She had no idea what she'd just unleashed. But she was about to find out that some old women have more fight left in them than anyone imagines. The phone started ringing before I'd even finished unpacking my suitcase in Margaret's guest room. "Let it go to voicemail," my sister said, settling into the armchair across from me with 2 cups of tea. She'd always been the practical one, 5 years younger but somehow wiser about people than I'd ever been. Through the window, I could see Margaret's neighbor walking his dog, completely unaware that my world had just shifted on its axis. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful. It was hard to believe that just 4 hours ago, I'd been standing in a kitchen being told I was worthless. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. "That's the 3rd call in 10 minutes, Margaret observed, eyeing my phone on the coffee table. "Maybe you should at least see what they want." I shook my head, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "I know what they want. They want to know what I wrote in that note." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "What did you write?" "Nothing dramatic. Just, thank you for showing me exactly where I stand. Don't look for me." I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest. Simple. To the point. "And that has them calling every 10 minutes? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text. Then another. Then 3 more in rapid succession. Margaret leaned forward. "Thelma, what aren't you telling me?" I closed my eyes, remembering the conversation I'd overheard 2 weeks ago. Zariah on the phone in the laundry room, her voice low and urgent. I'd only caught fragments, but they'd been enough to piece together something that made my blood run cold. "Mom needs to stay put until everything's finalized," Zariah had whispered into the phone. "We can't have her wandering off and complicating things. Just a few more weeks." At the time, I'd assumed she was talking about Wesley's job situation. He'd been stressed about a potential promotion that required relocating. But now, sitting in Margaret's living room with my phone buzzing like an angry wasp, I was beginning to wonder if there was more to it. "How long did you say you'd been living with them?" Margaret asked, her voice gentle but probing. "Almost 3 years, ever since Harold died and I couldn't afford the mortgage on my own." The admission still stung. Harold and I had worked so hard to pay off that house, only to lose it to medical bills in his final months. "And in those 3 years, how much have you contributed to their household?" I thought about it. The down payment I'd given them from Harold's life insurance, $25,000. The monthly contribution of $800 from my Social Security. The free babysitting, cooking, cleaning. The fact that I'd given up my independence to help them build their dream life. More than I should have, I admitted. Margaret's phone rang, making us both jump. She glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "It's someone named Wesley." My heart stopped. He called you? How did he get your number? Must have looked it up. Should I answer? I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Margaret put the phone on speaker. Hello? Margaret's voice was carefully neutral. Margaret, it's Wesley, Thelma's son. Is my mother there? His voice was tight, strained in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught sneaking out. Why would she be here, Wesley? Because she left this morning and we can't find her anywhere. She left a note saying not to look for her, but that's ridiculous. She can't just disappear. Margaret glanced at me. I shook my head frantically. I haven't heard from your mother in months, Margaret said smoothly. Have you tried calling her? Of course I've tried calling her. She's not answering. Look, Margaret, I need you to understand something. My mother hasn't been well lately. She's been confused, forgetting things. If she's out there alone, what kind of things has she been forgetting? Margaret's voice had an edge now, a pause. Just normal aging stuff. But Zariah thinks she might have early dementia or something. We've been taking care of her, making sure she takes her medications, monitoring her activities. She could be a danger to herself. I nearly choked on my tea. Dementia? Is that what they'd been telling people? That's interesting, Margaret said dryly. Because when I talked to Thelma last month, she seemed sharp as a tack. We discussed the new tax laws and their impact on fixed incomes. Very detailed conversation. Another pause, longer this time. She has good days and bad days. Look, if you hear from her, will you call me? Zariah is beside herself with worry. Margaret looked at me. I could see the skepticism in her eyes. Of course. I'll be sure to let you know. After she hung up, we sat in silence for a long moment. Dementia? Margaret finally said. That's the first I've heard of it. My hands were shaking now. Margaret, what if they've been telling everyone I'm losing my mind? What if that's why none of my old friends call anymore? The pieces were starting to fall into place. The way Zariah always answered my phone when it rang. How she'd gradually taken over my correspondence, saying she was helping me stay organized. The way she'd started accompanying me to doctor's appointments, speaking for me as if I couldn't express myself. Thelma, Margaret said slowly, when was the last time you handled your own finances? My stomach dropped. Zariah took over my checkbook 6 months ago. She said I was making mistakes, that I'd accidentally paid a bill twice. But had I? Or had she just told me I had? My phone rang again. This time, it was Zariah's number. Margaret looked at me. Answer it. Put it on speaker. I want to hear this. I hesitated, then pressed the green button. Hello? Thelma! Zariah's voice was honey-sweet, concerned. Oh, thank God. We've been so worried. Where are you, sweetheart? Sweetheart. She'd never called me that before. I'm safe, I said carefully. I know you're upset about this morning, and I feel terrible about how I spoke to you. I was just stressed about Wesley's promotion interview, and I took it out on you. Can you forgive me? I looked at Margaret, who was making a keep-talking gesture. I'm not sure I'm ready to come back yet, I said. But honey, you need your medications, and Dr. Peterson's office called about your appointment tomorrow. You know how important it is to keep up with your treatment. What treatment? What appointment? I hadn't been to Dr. Peterson in 3 months. I'll reschedule, I said. There was a pause. And when Zariah spoke again, her voice had lost some of its sweetness. Thelma, this isn't like you. You're not thinking clearly. You know you can't take care of yourself without help. I managed for 60 years before I moved in with you. That was different. You were younger then. Healthier. Zariah's voice was patient now, like she was talking to a child. You've been having episodes, remember? The burned dinner, forgetting your medication, getting lost on the way to the grocery store. I had gotten confused at the grocery store once, but only because they'd completely rearranged the layout. And the medication thing happened to everyone occasionally. I think I'm fine, I said. Of course you do. Zariah's voice was gentle, understanding. That's part of the condition, sweetie. People with dementia often don't realize they're having problems. Margaret's eyes went wide. She grabbed a pen and paper and wrote, She's gaslighting you. My heart pounded as the full scope of what had been happening hit me. How long had Zariah been painting me as a confused old woman? How many people had she convinced that I was losing my mind? I have to go, I said, my voice barely steady. Thelma, wait. I hung up and stared at Margaret. She's been telling people I have dementia. It sure sounds like it. Margaret's voice was grim. The question is why? What does she gain by making you seem incompetent? Before I could answer, my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Margaret nodded at me. Answer it. Hello? Mrs. Holloway, this is James Mitchell from Mitchell and Associates. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks. My blood ran cold. Mitchell and Associates was the law firm that had handled Harold's estate. I'm here, I managed. Excellent. We need to discuss some urgent matters regarding your late husband's estate. There have been some developments that require your immediate attention. I looked at Margaret, whose expression had gone from concern to alarmed. What kind of developments? I asked. I'd prefer to discuss this in person, but since it's urgent, we've located some additional assets. Quite substantial ones, actually. When can you come in? My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. Additional assets? Harold had been meticulous about his records. What could they have found? Can you give me a general idea of what we're talking about? I asked. Well, without going into specifics over the phone, we're looking at property values in the range of $400,000 to $600,000. The room spun around me. Margaret reached over and gripped my arm. Mrs. Holloway, are you there? Yes, I whispered. I'm here. Now, I should mention, your daughter-in-law called yesterday asking about the status of the estate. She seemed quite concerned about expediting the process. My blood turned to ice. Zariah had called the lawyers, behind my back. I'll be in touch, I said, and hung up before he could say anything else. Margaret and I stared at each other in stunned silence. She knows, I whispered. Knows what? Whatever this inheritance is, Zariah knows about it. That's why she's been keeping me close. That's why she's been telling everyone I'm losing my mind. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. She's been positioning herself to control my affairs. My phone started ringing again. Wesley's number this time. Neither of us moved to answer it. Thelma, Margaret said quietly, I think you need to stay hidden a little longer, until you figure out exactly what you're dealing with. I nodded, my mind racing. Zariah thought she had me under control, dependent and confused. She had no idea that her cruelty this morning had just set me free. But she was about to learn that this old woman wasn't nearly as helpless as she'd believed. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Zariah's face when she'd demanded to know what was in my note. The desperation in her voice during that phone call. The way she'd suddenly become so concerned about my health and appointments. Margaret made breakfast while I sat at her kitchen table staring at my phone. 17 missed calls overnight. 12 from Wesley, 5 from Zariah. No voicemails, which somehow made it worse. What were they so afraid I might say? You need to call that lawyer back, Margaret said, setting a plate of eggs in front of me. Whatever this inheritance is, you need to know about it before they do anything else. I nodded, but my hands were shaking too badly to dial. What if Harold kept something from me? We were married for 38 years. I thought I knew everything about our finances. Maybe he wanted to surprise you, or maybe it was something he forgot to mention. Margaret sat across from me, her expression serious. But Thelma, if this Zariah woman has been calling lawyers behind your back, you need to protect yourself. Before I could respond, my phone rang. James Mitchell's name appeared on the screen. Mrs. Holloway? His voice was crisp, professional. I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday. Actually, I'm glad you called. Can you tell me more about these assets you mentioned? Certainly. Are you somewhere private where we can talk freely? I looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, I'm with my sister. Excellent. Well, Mrs. Holloway, it appears your late husband owned property in Montana that wasn't included in the original estate inventory. A ranch property with mineral rights that he inherited from his Uncle Robert back in 1998. My heart stopped. Uncle Robert. Harold had mentioned him occasionally, an eccentric old man who'd lived alone on a ranch somewhere out west. Harold had been his only heir, but we'd never heard anything official about an inheritance. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "Harold never mentioned owning property in Montana. According to our research, the property was held in a trust that your husband may not have been fully aware of. The trustee was a local bank that's been managing the land for decades. But here's where it gets interesting. They've been trying to reach the beneficiary for the past 6 months because there's been a significant development." "What kind of development?" "Oil, Mrs. Holloway. A petroleum company has made a substantial offer for drilling rights. We're talking about an initial payment of $450,000, plus ongoing royalties that could amount to several $100,000 more over the next decade." The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. $450,000? That's just the initial payment. The royalties could be considerably more depending on what they find. Mr. Mitchell paused. "Mrs. Holloway, I need to ask you something important. Have you discussed this inheritance with anyone? Family members, perhaps?" "No," I whispered. "I had no idea it existed until yesterday." "That's concerning, because, as I mentioned, your daughter-in-law called our office 3 days ago. She claimed to be calling on your behalf, said you were having some health issues and that she was helping manage your affairs." My blood turned cold. "What exactly did she say?" "She wanted to know the status of all outstanding matters related to your husband's estate. She was quite insistent about getting documentation sent to her address rather than yours. She also mentioned that you might be experiencing some cognitive difficulties." Margaret leaned closer to the phone, her face pale. "Mr. Mitchell," I said carefully, "I want to be very clear about something. I have not authorized my daughter-in-law to handle any of my financial affairs. I am of sound mind, and I want all communication to come directly to me." "I'm relieved to hear that, Mrs. Holloway. To be honest, something felt off about that conversation. She seemed to know details about the Montana property that we hadn't shared with anyone yet." "What kind of details?" "She mentioned the petroleum company by name. The only way she could have known that information is if she had access to confidential legal documents or if someone from this office had spoken to her previously." My mind raced. How would Zariah have access to Harold's legal documents? I'd kept everything in a safe deposit box at the bank, and I was the only one with access. Unless, "Mr. Mitchell, when you sent correspondence about this inheritance, where did you send it?" "To the address we have on file for you." "Let me check." I heard papers rustling. "It shows here that we sent several letters to 42 Pine Street, beginning in August." Pine Street. Wesley and Zariah's address. The address I'd been living at for 3 years. "Those letters," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never received them." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Mrs. Holloway," Mr. Mitchell said finally, "I think you and I need to meet in person as soon as possible, and I think you may want to consider bringing someone with you, a witness to our conversation." After I hung up, Margaret and I sat in stunned silence. "She's been intercepting your mail," Margaret said finally. "For months. The betrayal cut through me like a knife. She's known about this inheritance since August, and she's been keeping me in that house like a prisoner so she can figure out how to get her hands on it. But why make you seem incompetent? If you inherit the property, it's yours regardless." I thought about the conversation I'd overheard in the laundry room, about Zariah insisting I needed to stay put until everything was finalized, about her sudden interest in my medications and doctor's appointments. Because if she can prove I'm mentally incompetent, Wesley could petition for guardianship, and if Wesley has legal control over my affairs, then she controls Wesley, which means she controls the money. Margaret's face was grim. "Thelma, this is serious. This isn't just about being mean to you. This is fraud." Before I could respond, my phone rang again. Wesley's number. "Don't answer it," Margaret said, but something in me had shifted. The scared, confused woman who'd left that house yesterday was gone. In her place was someone who'd been awakened to a level of betrayal she'd never imagined possible. I answered the phone. "Mom?" Wesley's voice was frantic. "Thank God. Where are you?" Zariah is going crazy with worry. She hasn't slept all night. I'm sure she hasn't, I said calmly. Look, I know you two had words yesterday, but this is getting ridiculous. You can't just disappear like this. What if something happened to you? What if you had an episode? An episode? You know what I mean. Like when you got confused at the grocery store, or when you forgot about dinner in the oven. Mom, Zariah, and I have been talking, and we think maybe it's time to consider getting you some help. What kind of help? Well, there are some really nice assisted living facilities nearby. Places where trained professionals can make sure you take your medication and keep track of your appointments. You'd have your own apartment, but with support when you need it. My heart sank. They'd already been planning to put me away. And what would happen to my finances? My social security? My savings? We'd help you manage all that, of course. You know you can trust us. Trust them. The people who'd been hiding a $450,000 inheritance from me for months. Wesley, I said quietly, do you remember when you were 12 and wanted that expensive bicycle for Christmas? Mom, what does that have to do with anything? I worked overtime for 3 months to afford it. Double shifts at the diner, cleaning offices on weekends. I barely saw you that fall because I was working so hard to make sure you got what you wanted. I remember. It was a great bike. And do you remember what I told you when I gave it to you? A pause. You said that love means making sacrifices for the people you care about. That's right. And for the past 3 years, I thought that's what I was doing by living with you and Zariah. Sacrificing my independence to help you build your life together. My voice was steady now, calm. But I realize now that love is supposed to go both ways. Mom, you're not making sense. Of course we love you. If you love me, Wesley, then answer me this. When was the last time you defended me when Zariah was cruel? When was the last time you asked me how I was feeling? Really feeling, instead of just assuming I was confused or forgetful? Silence. When was the last time you treated me like your mother, instead of like a burden you had to manage? Mom, that's not fair. Have you been planning to put me in assisted living? Another pause, longer this time. We just want what's best for you. That's not what I asked. Zariah thinks it might be good for you to be around other people your age, to have activities, and Zariah thinks. What do you think, Wesley? I think maybe you need more help than we can give you at home. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I'd been expecting them. I see. Mom, don't be like this. We're trying to help you. No, I said quietly. You're trying to control me. There's a difference. I hung up before he could respond. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. For what? For finally seeing them clearly. My phone immediately started ringing again, but I turned it off. I had a lawyer to visit and an inheritance to claim. But first, I had to figure out exactly how long Zariah had been planning to steal my life. The woman who'd been thrown out like garbage yesterday was gone. In her place was someone who'd finally remembered that she was worth fighting for. And the fight was just beginning. James Mitchell's office was in one of those old downtown buildings with brass nameplates and mahogany paneling that spoke of decades of trust and tradition. Margaret sat beside me as we waited in leather chairs that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Mrs. Holloway? A tall, silver-haired man appeared in the doorway. James Mitchell, thank you for coming in so quickly. His handshake was firm, his eyes kind but sharp. The kind of man who'd built a career on reading people and situations. Before we begin, he said, settling behind his desk, I want to assure you that everything we discuss today is completely confidential, and I want you to know that some of what I'm going to tell you may be disturbing. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand. After our phone conversation yesterday, I did some additional research into the contacts we've had regarding your late husband's estate. Mr. Mitchell opened a thick file folder. I think you need to see this. He slid a series of documents across the desk. Phone logs, copies of letters, email printouts. My heart sank as I saw Zariah's name again and again. Your daughter-in-law first contacted us in August, just 2 days after we sent the initial notification letter about the Montana property. She claimed you were experiencing health issues and had asked her to handle your correspondence. I stared at the dates. August 15th. I remembered that day clearly. It was the day after I'd helped Zariah reorganize the hall closet. She'd insisted on helping me sort through all the mail that had been piling up. She said you were having trouble processing complex information and that you'd given her power of attorney to handle your affairs, Mr. Mitchell's voice was carefully neutral. She was very convincing, very concerned about your welfare. I never gave her power of attorney, I said firmly. I know that now. But she had enough personal information about you and your late husband to make her story believable. She knew about your health insurance, your Social Security payments, even details about Harold's funeral arrangements. Of course she did. I'd been living in her house for 3 years. She'd seen every piece of mail, every phone call, every doctor's appointment. Margaret leaned forward. What exactly did she want? Initially, she just wanted information. Details about the inheritance process, timelines, documentation requirements. But then, in September, she called with a more specific request. He pulled out another document. She wanted to know about the process for transferring inherited property in cases where the beneficiary might be mentally compromised. My stomach dropped. She was researching how to take the inheritance away from me. It appears so. She asked very detailed questions about guardianship procedures, competency evaluations, and what would happen to inherited assets if the beneficiary was deemed unable to manage their own affairs. I thought about all those doctor's appointments Zariah had insisted on accompanying me to, how she'd started speaking for me, telling the doctors about my confusion and memory problems. She'd been building a case. There's more, Mr. Mitchell said gently. Last week, she contacted us again. This time, she had what she claimed was a signed power of attorney document. He slid another paper across the desk. My signature was at the bottom, but I'd never seen the document before in my life. This is not my signature, I said immediately. I suspected as much. The document also had some irregularities, wrong notary information, incorrect witness signatures. But Mrs. Holloway, if you hadn't contacted us directly, if I'd had to rely only on her communications, I might have proceeded with transferring the inheritance to your son's control. The room felt like it was spinning. How much money are we talking about exactly? Mr. Mitchell pulled out a new folder. The petroleum company's initial offer is $450,000 for drilling rights, but there's more. The property itself is worth approximately $200,000. And if the oil exploration is successful, the ongoing royalties could total well over $1 million over the next 10 to 15 years. Over $1 million. I'd been scraping by on $900 a month in Social Security, while Zariah was planning to steal over $1 million from me. She knew all of this? Margaret asked. Based on our phone conversations, yes. She seemed particularly interested in the timeline for the petroleum company's offer. They need a decision by December 1st, which is less than 3 weeks away. What happens if we miss the deadline? The offer expires. It might take years for another opportunity like this to come along, if ever. I understood now why Zariah had been so frantic yesterday. She'd been counting on having control of my affairs before the deadline. My disappearance had thrown her entire plan into chaos. Mr. Mitchell, I said slowly, what would have happened if I hadn't called you? If I'd stayed in that house and let her continue with this scheme? Well, with the forged power of attorney and documentation of your supposed mental decline, she could have petitioned the court for your son to become your legal guardian. Once that happened, all your assets would be under his control. And Zariah controls Wesley, Margaret said grimly. Mr. Mitchell nodded. It's actually a fairly sophisticated plan. Not uncommon in cases of elder financial abuse. The victim is gradually isolated, made to feel incompetent, while the abuser builds a paper trail of evidence supporting their claims of mental decline. Elder financial abuse. The words hung in the air like a diagnosis I didn't want to accept. How long has this been going on? I asked. Based on our records, she's been actively working on this since August, but some of the information she had suggests she's been monitoring your financial situation much longer than that. I thought about the past 3 years, how gradually Zariah had taken over more and more of my daily life. The checkbook she'd taken control of to help me stay organized. The mail she'd started sorting to reduce my stress. The way she'd slowly isolated me from my friends, always with reasonable excuses. "She's been planning this for years," I whispered. My phone, which I'd turned back on for the meeting, suddenly buzzed. A text from Wesley. "Mom, please call. Zariah is having a panic attack. She's convinced something terrible has happened to you." I showed the message to Mr. Mitchell. He raised an eyebrow. "A panic attack? She's probably terrified that I've figured out what she's been doing," I said. Another text came through, this one from Zariah herself. "Thelma, I'm so sorry about yesterday. I was completely out of line. Please come home. I'll make your favorite pot roast." Margaret snorted. "Now she wants to cook for you." Mr. Mitchell was studying something in his file. "Mrs. Holloway, there's one more thing you should know. Yesterday, after you called me, someone contacted the petroleum company directly." "What do you mean?" "Someone claiming to represent you called them and asked about expediting the paperwork for the drilling rights. They wanted to know if there was a way to fast-track the approval process." My hands went cold. "Zariah?" The name given was Wesley Holloway. "The caller claimed to be your son, acting on your behalf due to your health issues. Wesley, my own son, was actively participating in stealing from me." "What did the petroleum company say?" "They referred the caller back to us, which is proper procedure. But Mrs. Holloway, this suggests they're getting desperate. They're making moves that could expose them legally." I stared at the documents spread across the desk, evidence of a betrayal so deep, so calculated, that it took my breath away. These weren't just family members who'd grown tired of caring for an aging relative. These were people who'd spent months systematically planning to rob me of my independence, my dignity, and now my inheritance. "What are my options?" I asked. "Several. First, we need to secure the inheritance immediately. I'll contact the petroleum company today and make it clear that you are the sole beneficiary and that any communications must go directly through this office." "What about the fraud? The forged power of attorney?" "That's criminal fraud. You could press charges." His expression was serious. "But I should warn you, that would mean going to war with your own family. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about Wesley as a little boy, losing his first tooth. About the years I'd worked double shifts to give him everything he wanted. About the woman who'd been humiliated and thrown out like garbage just 2 days ago. "They started this war," I said quietly. "I'm just going to finish it." Mr. Mitchell nodded approvingly. "Then here's what we're going to do." As he outlined the plan, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Not power over other people, but power over my own life. The power to choose my own destiny instead of having it chosen for me. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Wesley. "Mom, where are you? We need to talk. This is important." For the first time in 3 years, I was the one with important information. And they were about to discover that the helpless old woman they'd been manipulating was much smarter than they'd ever imagined. The student was about to become the teacher, and class was about to begin. I stood on the front porch of what used to be my home, my hand hovering over the doorbell. It had been 5 days since I'd walked out of this house carrying a suitcase and a wounded heart. I was returning with legal documents, a clear mind, and a steel spine I'd forgotten I possessed. Margaret stood beside me, her presence both moral support and witness to whatever was about to unfold. In my purse were copies of all the evidence Mr. Mitchell had gathered, the forged power of attorney, the record of intercepted correspondence, the documentation of Zariah's fraudulent phone calls. "You sure you're ready for this?" Margaret whispered. Before I could answer, the door flew open. Zariah stood there in her silk robe, her face a mask of relief and fury all at once. "Thelma, thank God!" She reached for me like she was going to embrace me, but I stepped back. Her arms dropped, and something cold flashed in her eyes before she composed herself again. "We've been so worried. Wesley has barely slept. Come in, come in. I'll make coffee." Her voice was honey-sweet, but I could hear the edge underneath. "Hello, Zariah." I walked past her into the living room, Margaret close behind me. We need to talk. Of course. But first, let me just say how sorry I am about the other morning. I was completely out of line. The stress of Wesley's promotion, the house payments, everything just got to me and I took it out on you. It was unforgivable. Wesley appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas despite it being nearly noon. His hair was disheveled, his face drawn. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. Mom, his voice cracked slightly. Where have you been? We called everyone, hospitals, police, your old friends. We thought, he swallowed hard. We thought something terrible had happened to you. Sit down, both of you. I remained standing, my purse clutched in my hands. We have a lot to discuss. Zariah and Wesley exchanged a glance. Something passed between them, a communication I'd seen 1,000 times but never understood until now. They were coordinating their response. Mom, before we talk, I think you should know that we've been in touch with Dr. Peterson's office. You missed your appointment, and they're concerned about your medication levels. Wesley's voice was gentle, concerned. Have you been taking your pills? What pills, Wesley? Your memory medication. The stuff Dr. Peterson prescribed for your cognitive issues. I stared at him. I don't have cognitive issues, and I don't take memory medication. Zariah jumped in smoothly. Sweetie, that's part of the condition. Sometimes patients don't remember their diagnosis or their medications. Dr. Peterson explained that this could happen. Show me the prescription bottle, I said calmly. What? If I'm taking memory medication, show me the bottle. Tell me the name of the drug. Wesley and Zariah looked at each other again. It's upstairs, Zariah said finally. I keep all your medications organized in the bathroom cabinet. Go get it. Thelma, I don't understand why you're being so hostile. We're just trying to help you. I reached into my purse and pulled out the first document, a copy of the letter from Mitchell and Associates, dated August 15th, addressed to me at this house. Did you receive this letter, Zariah? Her face went pale, but she barely glanced at it. I don't know what that is. It's correspondence from Harold's estate attorney. It was sent to this address 3 months ago. According to the law firm's records, someone called them 2 days later claiming to represent me. I have no idea what you're talking about. I pulled out the phone log showing Zariah's calls to the law firm. This shows 15 phone calls between August and November, all from someone identifying herself as Zariah Holloway, claiming to be handling my affairs because of my mental incompetence. Wesley was staring at the papers, his face growing paler by the minute. Mom, what is this about? It's about a $450,000 inheritance that your wife has been trying to steal from me. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that I could see spreading across both their faces. But Zariah's shock looked different from Wesley's. His was the shock of someone learning something new. Hers was the shock of someone caught. That's ridiculous, Zariah said, but her voice was too high, too fast. I don't know anything about any inheritance. I pulled out another document. This is a forged power of attorney with my signature on it. According to the handwriting expert Mr. Mitchell consulted, it's a very good forgery, but it's not my signature. Wesley stood up abruptly. What are you saying, Mom? I'm saying that your wife has been intercepting my mail, forging legal documents, and spreading lies about my mental health in order to gain control of an inheritance she's known about for months. That's insane. Zariah's mask was starting to slip. Wesley, you know I would never do something like that. Your mother is confused. She's not thinking clearly. Am I confused about this? I pulled out the final document, a record of the phone call Wesley had made to the petroleum company, trying to expedite the drilling rights approval. Wesley's face went ashen. How did you... So you did call them? My heart broke a little more. My own son, trying to help steal from his mother. No, Mom, that's not what happened. Zariah said you'd asked us to help with the paperwork because you were having trouble understanding it all. She said you were embarrassed about needing help. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, and saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't the mastermind. He was just another one of Zariah's victims. Wesley, I said gently, When have I ever been embarrassed about asking for help when I needed it? He blinked, processing this. When he was 8 and struggled with math homework, I'd asked the neighbor to tutor him. When money was tight, I'd asked family for help with groceries. I'd never been too proud to admit when I was in over my head. She told me you were scared, Wesley said slowly, looking at Zariah. She said you didn't want to worry me because you knew I was stressed about work. What else did she tell you? She said. He swallowed hard. She said Dr. Peterson had diagnosed you with early dementia. She said you'd made her promise not to tell me because you didn't want me to see you as weak. Have you spoken to Dr. Peterson directly? No. Zariah always handled your medical appointments. She said it was easier because she could explain things better than you could. I watched as the pieces clicked into place in Wesley's mind. The same realization I'd had at Margaret's house, but harder for him because it meant accepting that the woman he'd married was capable of something so calculating, so cruel. Zariah must have seen it too, because she suddenly changed tactics. Fine, she snapped, her sweet mask finally slipping completely. You want the truth? Yes, I knew about the inheritance. Yes, I've been handling the correspondence, but not because I wanted to steal anything, because I was trying to protect this family. Protect us from what? Wesley's voice was quiet, dangerous. From her. Zariah pointed at me. Do you know what $450,000 would do to someone like your mother? She'd give it all away to every sob story that came along. She'd be taken advantage of by every scam artist and con man in the country. Within a year, it would all be gone. So you decided to take it instead? I decided to make sure it stayed in the family. I was trying to set up a trust fund, something that would benefit all of us but keep her from making stupid decisions with money she doesn't understand. I stared at her, amazed by her audacity. A trust fund that you would control. Someone has to. Look at you, Thelma. You can't remember to turn off the stove. You get confused at the grocery store. You're 63 years old and you've never owned a computer or understood anything more complicated than a checkbook. Did you really think you were capable of managing that kind of money? The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. But more than that, it was revealing. This wasn't just about the money. This was about control, about power, about Zariah's fundamental belief that she was superior to everyone around her. You're right about one thing, I said calmly. I've never owned a computer. I do sometimes forget things. I did burn dinner once. I paused, watching her face. But I raised 4 children on my own after their father died. I worked 3 jobs to put Wesley through college. I managed a household budget for 40 years and never once bounced a check or missed a payment. Wesley was staring at Zariah like he'd never seen her before. And more importantly, I continued, I would never ever forge someone's signature or lie to lawyers or convince my own family that someone they love is losing their mind just to get my hands on money that doesn't belong to me. Zariah's face twisted with rage. You self-righteous old bitch. You think you're so much better than everyone else, but you're nothing. You're a broke old woman living off Social Security who couldn't survive one day in the real world without someone taking care of you. Zariah, Wesley's voice was sharp. No, Wesley, she needs to hear this. She needs to understand that this fantasy of independence she's been having is just that. A fantasy. She needs us. Without us, she's nothing. I reached into my purse one more time and pulled out a business card. James Mitchell, attorney at law. Mr. Mitchell is expecting your call, Wesley. He's prepared to go over all the legal documents with you personally. He'll explain exactly what your wife has been doing and what the legal consequences could be. Wesley took the card with trembling hands. And Zariah, I said, turning to face her directly. Mr. Mitchell also wanted me to give you a message. Forging someone's signature on a legal document is a felony. So is fraud. So is elder abuse. He's filed a report with the district attorney's office, and they'll be conducting an investigation. The color drained from Zariah's face completely. You can't prove anything, she whispered. Actually, I can. Phone records, handwriting analysis, recorded conversations with the law firm. It's all there. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Wesley stood up, his face a mask of devastation and rage. Get out, he said quietly. Wesley, Zariah reached for him. Get out! His voice cracked like a whip. Pack your things and get out of my house. Now! You can't be serious. I'm your wife. You're a stranger. I don't know who you are, but you're not the woman I married. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the little boy who'd lost his first tooth, who'd cried when his pet hamster died, who'd hugged me tight when I'd worked those double shifts to buy him things we couldn't afford. I know you are, I said softly. As Zariah stormed upstairs to pack, Wesley and I stood in the wreckage of what had once been a family, both of us understanding that some betrayals cut so deep that healing might take years. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe again. The war was almost over. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, making coffee in a mug that said, "World's Best Grandma," a gift from Wesley, part of his ongoing campaign to rebuild our relationship. Through the window, I could see the community garden where I'd started volunteering, tending to tomatoes and herbs with other women who'd discovered that life after 60 could be just as vibrant as anything that came before. The apartment wasn't fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a galley kitchen, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every choice about how to spend my days belonged to me alone. The inheritance money had bought me something more valuable than luxury. It had bought me freedom. My phone rang, interrupting my morning routine. Margaret's name appeared on the screen. "How are you feeling about today?" she asked without preamble. Today, the day of Zariah's sentencing hearing. Nervous, I admitted, settling into my favorite chair by the window. But ready. The district attorney had built a solid case. Forgery, fraud, attempted theft, elder abuse. The charges had stacked up like a house of cards built on Zariah's arrogance and greed. Her attorney had tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor had been clear. This kind of systematic abuse of vulnerable seniors was exactly the type of crime they wanted to make an example of. Wesley still planning to be there? Yes. I sipped my coffee, thinking about how much my son had changed over the past months. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Zariah had tried to claim half of everything, including the house I'd helped buy, but the evidence of fraud had poisoned any sympathy the court might have had for her. She'd walked away with almost nothing. Wesley had offered to give me back the $25,000 I'd contributed to their down payment, but I'd refused. Keep it, I'd told him. Consider it tuition for one of life's most expensive lessons. And how is Wesley doing? Better. He's in therapy. We're in therapy together sometimes, trying to figure out how to be mother and son again. It wasn't easy. The betrayal had cut deep on both sides. His betrayal of me, and my realization that I'd raised a son who could be so easily manipulated into participating in his own mother's abuse. But we were trying. And for the first time in years, our conversations felt honest. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. That's probably him now, I told Margaret. I'll call you after the hearing. Wesley stood in my hallway looking older than his 35 years, but also somehow healthier. The constant stress that had shadowed his features during his marriage was gone, replaced by something that looked like peace. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be. The courthouse was exactly what you'd expect. Marble floors, high ceilings, and an atmosphere of solemn justice. Wesley and I sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, watching as Zariah was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. She looked smaller than I remembered. Prison had stripped away her designer clothes, her perfect makeup, her aura of superiority. What remained was a 32-year-old woman who'd gambled everything on a scheme that had ultimately destroyed her life. She didn't look back at us. The judge was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She'd read every document, heard every piece of testimony, and now she was ready to render judgment. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, addressing Zariah, "you have pleaded guilty to multiple felonies involving the systematic abuse and fraud of a vulnerable senior citizen. Before I pass sentence, is there anything you'd like to say?" Zariah stood, her shackles clinking softly. For a moment, I thought she might finally show some remorse, some recognition of the harm she'd caused. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "I maintain that my actions were motivated by concern for my family's financial stability. I never intended to permanently deprive Mrs. Holloway of her inheritance. I was trying to ensure responsible management of a significant sum of money." Even now, even here, she couldn't admit what she'd really done. She couldn't acknowledge the months of psychological abuse, the systematic destruction of my confidence, the calculated cruelty of making me believe I was losing my mind. The judge's expression didn't change, but I saw something harden in her eyes. "Mrs. Holloway, what you did was not financial management. It was predatory behavior designed to exploit and control a vulnerable person who trusted you. You forged legal documents, intercepted mail, spread lies about your victim's mental capacity, and manipulated your own husband into participating in your scheme." She paused, letting the words sink in. Elder abuse is one of the fastest-growing crimes in our society, and it's often perpetrated by family members who believe they're entitled to their victims' resources. Your actions represent exactly the kind of calculated exploitation that destroys families and devastates lives. Zariah remained standing, but I could see her hands shaking. "I hereby sentence you to 3 years in state prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. You will also pay full restitution for legal fees and court costs, and you are permanently barred from any involvement in the financial affairs of vulnerable adults." 3 years. It felt both like too much and not enough. Too much because, despite everything, I'd never wanted to see anyone go to prison. Not enough because 3 years couldn't undo the damage she'd done to my relationship with Wesley, to my sense of trust, to my belief in my own competence. But justice isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. And for the first time in her life, Zariah was being held accountable for her choices. As the bailiff led her away, she finally turned to look at us. Her eyes found Wesley first, and I saw a flash of the woman who'd once convinced him she loved him. Then her gaze moved to me. I'd wondered what I would feel in this moment. Satisfaction? Vindication? Pity? What I felt was relief. The woman who'd tried to steal my life was finally facing the consequences of her actions. The nightmare was over. Outside the courthouse, Wesley and I stood in the afternoon sunshine, neither of us quite sure what to say. "How do you feel?" he asked finally. "Free," I said, and realized it was true. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I looked at him, seeing echoes of the boy he'd been and the man he'd become. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? Really forgive me? Not just say you have because you think you should?" I considered the question seriously. Over the past months, I'd thought about forgiveness a lot. About the difference between forgiving someone and trusting them again. About whether love was enough to overcome betrayal. "I think," I said slowly, "that forgiveness isn't a destination. It's a journey. And I think we're both walking it, one day at a time." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I love you, Mom. I know I didn't show it very well, but I do love you." "I know you do, and I love you too." That was never the question. We parted ways in the courthouse parking lot, each of us heading back to our separate lives. But for the first time in years, I felt like we were heading in the same direction. That evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and the latest statements from my investment account. The petroleum company had found oil, just as predicted. The royalty checks were larger than I'd ever imagined possible. I was, by any measure, a wealthy woman. But wealth, I'd learned, wasn't about the number in your bank account. It was about having choices. It was about waking up each morning and deciding for yourself how to spend your day. It was about being surrounded by people who valued you for who you were, not what you could give them. I pulled out my laptop. Yes, I'd finally learned to use a computer, much to everyone's surprise, and opened the email I'd been working on all week. "Dear Harold," I typed, knowing he couldn't read it but needing to write it anyway. "I wish you could see me now. I wish you could see what I've become since you've been gone. You always said I was stronger than I knew, and I think you would be proud of the woman I've found the courage to be." I paused, thinking about the journey that had brought me here, the humiliation that had become liberation, the betrayal that had become empowerment, the family that had tried to diminish me, only to help me discover just how large my life could be. I'm happy, Harold. For the first time in years, I'm truly happy. And I wanted you to know that whatever challenges are ahead, I'm ready for them. Because I've finally learned that home isn't a place or a group of people. Home is being comfortable with who you are, no matter where life takes you. I saved the document and closed the laptop. Outside my window, the community garden was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Tomorrow I would be there again, my hands in the soil, surrounded by women who'd also learned that the second half of life could be even richer than the first. But tonight, I would simply sit in my own space, drink my tea, and enjoy the profound satisfaction of a life reclaimed. At 63, I was finally living on my own terms. And it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. The old Thelma, the one who'd been thrown away like garbage, was gone forever. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, protected her boundaries, and refused to accept anything less than the respect she deserved. Some stories end with revenge. This one ended with something far more powerful: rebirth. And the best part? The story was just beginning. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.